the channel and welcome to the latest in my series of videos about how to pass an advanced driving test. So that's any of the UK, either civilian or police or emergency services advanced driving tests. And in this video we're going to look at braking. Now braking, of course, is another one of those things that you do literally every time you get in the car, from the moment you set off to the moment you finish your journey. But there's certain things that we're looking for on an advanced driving test. And one thing I'd say about braking is, if you're struggling with system at all, there's a very good chance that the fault is in your braking and the way that you're applying the brakes. And I'll explain that during the video. One of the things we don't need to look at in too much detail is what's required by all the different organisations, because it's all exactly the same. We're looking for a nice, smooth, consistent three-phase application of the brakes, and I'll talk you through all that. And I've gone to a bit of trouble with this video, so bear with me. I've gone a bit open university with it, and I've done some graphs. And who doesn't love a graph? So I'll introduce those graphs, and that'll help me explain what we're looking for with braking. Now, actually, the very first video that I made and put onto YouTube was about braking. It was an introduction to advanced driving, and it was an introduction to braking. I look back at that video, it looks pretty amateur these days, but I'll put a link in the description below, and I think I've got another video on emergency braking as well. It might be worth you looking at that. But this video is very, very specifically about what's required on your advanced driving test in relation to the application of the brakes. So let's start with an old Roadcraft definition. I don't think this definition's in any of the current versions of Roadcraft, but years ago there used to be a very specific definition in Roadcraft of braking sense. And I'll try and get this right. Braking sense is the ability of a driver to apply the brakes in a gradual and timely manner to stop or reduce the speed of the vehicle where this cannot be achieved by deceleration alone. So a bit of a mouthful, that was one of the definitions I had to learn for my police advanced car course back in the mid-90s. But it's quite a nice definition. It talks about deceleration, it talks of, it sets the scene that the start of any application of the brakes actually is deceleration, is coming off the gas pedal, a recognition that the gas pedal works both ways. It doesn't just accelerate the car, it decelerates the car as well. But a few questions in the comments about engine braking. I will cover that in another video. I'll cover engine braking versus acceleration sense in another video, so save those questions for that. I'll explain all that kind of thing. What I'm talking about today is application of the brakes. So I'm going to introduce in this video to three-phase braking. Now, there are probably a lot more phases to braking. If you really break it down, you can probably break it down into, I don't know, 15, 20 phases of what you're doing with the brake pedal. But I'm going to keep it really simple. I'm going to keep it to three phases. So let's have a look at the first graph, and this graph shows the three phases of braking. And phase one is the start of the braking process. Now remember, I use this term where we want to let the car know what we're going to do. So the first phase of braking is to gently start pressing the pedal. Remember that the braking system is a hydraulic system, so that first application of the brake pedal just starts to build the pressure up in the hydraulic system. It starts to push the brake pads up against the brake discs, and it lets the car know what you're going to do. It lets the car know that you're going to start braking. So what we want to really avoid is that stabby brake action. And we've all experienced that with other drivers, or maybe even with ourselves, where we stab the brake pedal and you can feel yourself nod forward in the seat. That's a rough initial application of the brakes, and we want to avoid that. So if you look at phase one on the graph, you'll see that it's a nice gradual introduction of the brakes, where we just start to build that brake pressure up and the car's weight starts going forward on its nose. And we're letting the car know what we're going to do. Now the second phase is where we do the bulk of the braking. That's where we squeeze the brake pedal more and we reduce the speed of the vehicle. That's where we get most of the speed off. And I'm going to come back to that second phase in a minute. So I want to have a quick look at the third phase, but the second phase is the bit that's variable. That's the bit that you can change and you can alter, depending on how much or how little speed that you need to lose. The third phase of braking, if we go back to the graph for a second, you'll see that it's pretty much a mirror image of the first phase of braking. We tail off and we ease off the brakes until we're completely off the brake pedal. Now this is a common mistake for a lot of people, certainly when they're starting to learn this stuff. Most people have a good idea that they want to start the braking nice and smoothly, and we want to start the car slowing down gently and let the car know what it's going to do. But what happens is that they focus on the next phase, they focus on the gear phase, and they forget that they need to finish off the braking. So phase 3 is finishing off the braking, it's easing off the brake pedal. And that's relevant if we're losing 10 or 15 miles an hour to negotiate a corner, and it's also relevant if we're coming down to a stop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the brakes just as we go up this little uphill stretch here in a 30 limit. I'll check the mirrors. I'll wait till this bike's gone past. And I'm going to come to a stop with 3-phase braking. Gently onto the brakes, building the braking up, and then as we come to a stop, just tailing off the brakes for the last few yards of travel. And what that does is that really smooths out that final stop. So instead of coming to a stop with I'll just demonstrate it to you. Instead of keeping the brakes on and coming to a stop with a little nod, if we can tail the braking off, it's much smoother. And remember, your examiner, when you're on test, wants a nice smooth ride, and they want to see that you can tail that braking off. So just think about that graph, think about that phase, that third phase of the braking where we're tailing the braking off. Now, I said I was going to come back to the second phase of braking. This is the bit that's variable. So we can be very gentle in that middle phase of braking. If we just want to remove 10 or 15 miles an hour, you know, just to negotiate a corner or a bend or something like that, we can just very gently squeeze it, or we can press it a bit harder, we can press it more firmly, or we can press it really hard, almost up to threshold braking. And this is where people think that you're going to lose some smoothness, and I promise you, you're not. As long as you get the first phase and the third phase correct, that second phase can be pretty firm braking. You know, on the rare occasions that I drive on track, I'm going to be using 3-phase braking because I still want the car to be very smooth, and I want the weight transfer to be nice and smooth and progressive. But you can brake really, really hard as long as you get phase 1 and phase 3 correct. But actually, if we brake more firmly in that second phase, the graph doesn't look like this, it ends up looking like this. And I want you to think in terms of the point where we are coming off the brakes. This is where it's relevant to your application of the system of car control. Because where we come off the brakes is that's the point where it gives us time to get the gear. Or in an automatic car, it gives the car time to get the gear. And what a lot of people struggle with the application of system car control is giving themselves that time to get that gear, getting off the brakes and then changing gear. And this is where the secret is in your braking. The secret is to remove a little bit more speed a little bit earlier. So you don't need to start the braking earlier. This is the key. A lot of people think, well, if I want to get off the brakes earlier, I need to start braking earlier. You don't. Look at the graph. The starting point of the braking doesn't change. And in fact, phase 1 and phase 3 don't change. What changes is we increase the pressure in the second phase of braking. And that allows us then to get off the brakes earlier. So that point where we're off the brakes, that little red circle there, we get there earlier, we're off the brakes earlier, and that creates that space for us to get the gear. That creates the space for the gear phase, either in a manual or an automatic car. So let's just demonstrate that briefly now in a few little bits of different circumstances, the 3 phases of braking, and show you how it links into the system of car control as well. So I'm on quite an open moorland road at the moment. Most of these corners, to be fair, are quite flowing. I'm using acceleration sense just to get my speed right into these corners. But there's one a little bit further up where I'm going to need some braking. And I'm not going to be braking down from a particularly high speed, but it's definitely not a corner that I can just reduce the speed enough by deceleration. Not unless I'm absolutely crawling along. And obviously, you know, we're trying to balance off progress with restraint. And at the moment, this road, yeah, we can carry a nice bit of progress up to the national speed limit of 60 mile an hour. And of course, we can use nature's brake as well. We can use the hill. just to slow us down a little bit there. But I know at the end of this long right-hander is a left-hander. I'm going to need some brakes for that left-hander, so I'm going to apply 3 phases of braking. So first phase, remember, we'll be gently introducing the brakes, squeezing the brake pedal, building the braking up. So I'm on that phase about here, just gently, then firming the braking up. Phase 2, off the brakes for phase 3, nice and smoothly off. And for your passenger, they shouldn't really feel the transition between the end of phase 3 and the start of the acceleration. It should be blended across. There shouldn't be an obvious point where you're off the brakes and on the gas. Now I should say it's a bit difficult to judge this for yourself because you're driving, you know, you're expecting your own actions, so it's a bit more difficult to judge it for yourself. But be judged, you know, let your instructor or your observer judge it for you. Here, gentle squeeze, a little bit more in the middle, off the brakes and then back on the gas again. Remember that off the brakes is a very, very common mistake, and you know, you'll see people who are really smooth onto the brakes, really good at getting that speed off, and then they just tend to jump off the brakes at the last minute and it just spoils it. So down here there's a quite severe dip at the bottom of the road here, so again I'm up to about 60 miles an hour in the national speed limit, checking the mirrors, but I know that I need to brake for that dip, so I'm gently on the brakes now, and now I'm firming the braking up and now easing off the brakes, and then a little bit of acceleration just to take us through that dip, because we don't want to bottom out at the bottom there. At the end of this road there's a T-junction. I'm going to turn left. I'm probably going to have to either stop or really get the car down to about 1 or 2 miles an hour before I can get the view. But again, 3 phases of braking. So first of all, off the gas, gently onto the brakes, first application, then gently build the braking up in the second phase. And then as we get towards the giveaway, just easing off the brake pedal, still holding the car on the brake pedal, and then gently accelerating out of the junction once we've got the view. But I can't emphasise enough how important it is to get that second phase of braking correct. If you don't get enough speed off in that middle phase, you won't leave yourself enough time at the end, either for the car to get the gear, or if you're in a manual car, to get the gear yourself. So just make sure you get off that brake pedal early enough, and in order to do that, squeeze the brakes a little bit more in that middle phase. Another common mistake is that people tend to just vary the pressure that they've got on the brake pedal. So here I'm doing 50, I'm going to slow the car down to 40 for this change in speed limit, checking the mirrors, they'll press the brakes and then they'll press it more, and then you just get this little nodding action in the car. And again, they don't know they're doing it. Because they're doing it themselves, they're already braced against that braking action, they don't feel it themselves. But just be conscious of what you're doing with the brake pedal. In the steering video, I talked about steering once in and once out and avoiding 50 pence steering. I'm not sure if 50 pence really applies to braking, but we can call it 50 pence braking if it helps. But it's just that constant change in the pressure on the brake pedal, and you'll feel it in the passenger seat. You'll see your passengers just nodding forwards and backwards a little bit. What we want to do is apply the brakes once, gently at first, firming the braking up, and then relaxing off the brake pedal for that third phase. Just one application of brakes. So we've got a roundabout coming up. Let's apply the system of car control, and I'll talk you through what I'm doing with the brakes, but I'll talk you through all 5 phases, and then I'll try and concentrate on what we're doing with the brakes. So at the next roundabout, I'm going to take first exit left onto the motorway. So I'm checking the mirrors, I'll give a signal at the appropriate time. Position is going to be near side. I'm taking that near side position now, and I'm gently on the brakes for the speed phase. Gently at first. Now I'm firming the braking up, and I'm planning to stop, but I'm looking to go. So at the moment I could either stop or go. Now I know I can go, I'm off the brakes gently and gently onto the gas, and then squeezing the gas on. And now I'm building my speed up down onto the slip road. So at that point where you're planning to stop and you're looking to go, you could go either way with the brakes. We could continue to brake down to a stop and then just tail off as we come to a stop, or we can transition across to the gas, let the car get the gear, and then accelerate onto the roundabout. Now I'm going to leave the motorway at the next exit, so we're going to be slowing the car down from motorway speeds, from higher speeds on the slip road. It's even more important when you're braking from higher speeds that you keep the brake application smooth and consistent, and we stick with those 3 phases of braking. onto the slip road. I'm taking second exit left, got brake lights up ahead. So I'm in the near side lane for position. I'm off the gas. Traffic lights are turning to red, so I'm gently onto the brakes. First phase of braking. Now I'm into the bulk of the braking. Second phase, getting most of the speed off here. So just towards the end of the braking, we'll come to a nice smooth stop. Now when you come into a stop in a line of traffic like this, there's a little saying that your observers or your instructors will get into your tyres and tarmac. That means that we can see the bottom of the tyres of the car in front where they're in contact with the road. That's it's just a way of judging your distance from the car in front. Now if you're an emergency services driver especially, this is really important, because if we're stuck in this line of traffic now and a job comes in and we need to switch the blue lights on, we don't want to be faffing about reversing and making space to get out. We want to just be able to drive out forwards, and if you stick with that tyres and tarmac rule, you'll be able to get out into traffic with your blue lights on and get on your way to your emergency without too much faffing. But for civilian drivers as well, it's always useful. You know, you never know, the car in front might stall, break down, have an issue, and it's much easier just to drive forwards than it is to have to reverse back or get cooperation from the car behind and all that kind of stuff. So tyres and tarmac, nice little rule that. Another little pointer with braking, you know, we try to avoid braking in corners, especially when we're travelling at higher speeds. But there may be times when you are on a long downhill run and there might be hairpin bends or tight bends. Those corners, you definitely don't want to be off the brakes completely, because the car will pick up speed very quickly. So the general rule of thumb is that you do more of your braking on the straights in those circumstances and a bit less braking in the corners, but you don't come off the brakes in the corners. Just easing back on the brakes allows the car just to accelerate just very, very gently through the corner without you having to press the accelerator, because gravity will do the acceleration for you. So that's it for braking. It's a fairly straightforward subject. I hope I've got it across in a way that's easy to understand. Like I said before, as far as the different organisations, the emergency services, they're all looking for the same thing. Nice smooth application, 3 phases of the braking, giving yourself enough time at the end of the braking for the gear phase if you need it, and especially coming off that brake pedal nice and smooth, giving your examiner a nice smooth ride down the road without nodding too much in relation to the application of the brakes. The only exception to that 3-phase braking is in an emergency. In an emergency, can't express this enough, what you need to do is press that brake pedal as hard and as fast as you possibly can and keep that brake pedal mullered right into the bulkhead as hard as you can. You won't break the pedal, you won't break the system. The ABS will kick in and the car will come to a stop as suddenly and as quickly as it possibly can. Keep that brake pedal pressed in an emergency as hard as you can until the car is stopped. I've done a video on emergency braking. I'll put the link in the description below. Go and have a look at that. But that's the only exception to this 3-phase braking rule. The rest of the time, especially on advanced test, this is what we're looking for. So, hope you've enjoyed the video. Hope it's been useful for you. Don't forget, this is a series of videos about how to pass your advanced driving test. The thumbnails will be in blue for that particular series of videos, but I will still be uploading other videos over the next few weeks and months. You know, the usual stuff. Got some ideas about some interesting videos that you might want to watch. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, give us a thumbs up if you've enjoyed the video. If you have any questions about braking, put them in the comments below. I will get back to you. Sometimes it takes me a few days or maybe a week, but I will get back to you. I will answer any genuine questions that people put in the comments below. But for now, thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.